Our first speaker is an environmental planner with more than 10 years of experience in spatial and development planning, policy formulation, and collaborating with other development partners, institutions, national agencies, and local government units to promote urban planning and development through various significant plans, projects, and activities. Most of her professional work was at the National Economic and Development Authority, now known as DepDev, where she handled the preparation of various plans such as Regional Development Plan, Regional Physical Framework Plan, and Disaster Rehabilitation Plans, as well as provision of technical assistance to LGUs on formulating Provincial Development Physical Framework Plans. She has a Master of Science in Urban Management and Development from the Institute of Housing and Urban Development Studies from Erasmus University in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. She also has a diploma in Public Management from UP Diliman and a Bachelor of Science in Development Communication from UP Los Baños. Let's all welcome our first speaker, Ma'am Theresa Jane Medenilla, Chief Urban Development Division, DHSUD LFTP.
Good morning, everyone, to all our guests and participants to this webinar. I'm pleased to share the highlights of DHSUD's new guidelines on new towns and planned unit development, or PUD. So this will be the outline of my presentation, and I hope to cover the following subtopics. So for our planning context, in 2020, more than 50% or around 54% of the country's total population, or around 58.98 million, lived in urban barangays. As a result of this rapid urbanization, we have seen a very extensive peri-urban development or uncontrolled urban expansion, or what we call urban sprawl, that is now being experienced even by smaller cities in the Philippines. So we've seen rapid conversion of agricultural lands into residential developments. We know, of course, that urban areas in the country face many development issues. So we experience poor urban planning and design, disaster risk, inadequate infrastructure, poor service delivery. Housing provision is also a major problem in urban areas, and we have seen slums and blighted areas. So these urban issues, they negatively affect the quality of life of the residents living in cities and make our settlements more vulnerable to the climate change and disasters. So the PUD guidelines is aligned with national urban laws and frameworks in the Philippines. So I would just like to highlight the policy anchors or the policy basis of the PUD guidelines. So of course, this includes Republic Act number 11201, creating the DHSUD. And we have, of course, Republic Act 7160, or the Local Government Code, which affirms, I would like to highlight, the authority of our LGUs to prepare their CLUPs and enact zoning ordinances as a primary basis for their land use allocation. We also have our National Housing and Urban Development Sector Plan. So this is the long-term sector plan of the housing sector, which identifies the need to manage urban expansion, improve access to land and housing, and promote inclusive, resilient, and integrated human settlements. Recently, in 2023, the department also adopted what we call the Resilient and Green Human Settlements Framework, or RGHSF, and it highlights the need to employ resilient and sustainable land use and urban planning. In terms of planning guidelines, I'm sure our LGUs are very familiar already with this. We have the existing 2014 CLUP guidebook, which actually already identifies PUD, or planned unit development zoning, as a planning approach to integrated development. However, admittedly, there is a need to provide clearer planning standards on PUD to promote and enforce this planning and regulation. So in response to these challenges, and in line with the mandates of the department that I just mentioned earlier, the department has recently developed and issued the guidelines on new towns and PUD. So these guidelines will serve as a guide for planning and implementation of new towns, settlements, and urban development programs in the country. This policy that we just recently developed provides detailed guidance on settlements, planning principles, and considerations, site identification and selection processes, zoning and design standards, approaches for land utilization, as well as implementation strategies to facilitate the establishment of resilient, inclusive, livable, and well-planned communities. So this new guidelines has already been adopted by the department through our Department Circular 2025-015. So this was issued last August 14, 2025, and I'm also happy to share that a copy of the guidelines is also available for download in our agency website. So based on this policy issuance, the PUD guidelines will serve as the planning standard for urban development for the national government, local government units, as well as the private sector. So the target users of the guidelines include our, of course, national government agencies and local government units, as well as private sector developers and investors. The contents of the guidelines is as follows. So if you will read through the guidelines, you will see that it has a very comprehensive contents from the planning and design of PUDs to the implementation part. So just showing the key sections of the PUD guidelines. Okay, so now we will define the key terminologies that are contained in the guidelines. So PUD, as defined already in our existing CLUP guidebook, this definition is retained in the guidelines. So just to refresh everyone, PUD can be defined as a land development scheme where the project site is comprehensively planned as a unified entity. At the same time, PUDs allow flexibility in planning and design, building placement, land use compatibility, open space use, and the preservation of natural features. We'd also like to highlight that actually in the existing CLUP guidebooks that we have, there's already a provision that PUDs of LGUs must include what we call comprehensive development master plans, or CDMPs that specify land uses, building details, road networks, utilities, and deed of restriction. So these CDP is important because it will be the basis for obtaining locational clearances and other development permits later on. So moving forward, PUD will be now used as the umbrella term to new towns, planned city extensions, and PUD projects. So as you can see here, it will be an encompassing term that includes the other terms that are commonly used when we describe PUDs. So the new guidelines of DSUDs categorizes PUDs actually into three geographic, administrative, and planning scales. So we are recommending three scales for PUDs. First is at the neighborhood or barangay level. This is the smallest unit of PUDs, followed by district PUDs, and the largest one are new town or planned city extension PUDs. So these three scales or types are differentiated by size, land use, and transportation. I will be discussing this later on in the next few slides. I would also like to highlight that essentially po, no, all PUDs are mixed-use developments. So it is important to highlight that PUDs should be mixed-use development, meaning it should blend multiple uses, such as, for example, residential, commercial, cultural, institutional into one space, where those functions are to some degree both physically and functionally integrated and provides pedestrian connection. So why is a mixed land use important? Because mixed land uses promote quality. It also reduces car dependency, enhance local economies, and support diverse communities by integrating a variety of compatible activities and land uses together. So going back to the scales of PUDs, so we will just go through this quickly. So the smallest unit of the PUD or the building block of PUDs are what we call neighborhood or barangay PUD. So typically, this is a type of, this is a walkable PUD, which has around 300 meters to 1 kilometer that consists of a grouping of compatible land uses that is centered around a central plaza or a neighborhood park and is serviced by a transit stop. The next scale of PUD is what we call a district type of PUD, which is uh, composed of 7 or more neighborhood PUDs, and its areas range from around 21 to 99 hectares, and already has a major transit stop or terminal with various modes of transportation, and ideally what we call a district park. The development may be also horizontal or vertical depending on the market demand of the area. So we can think of our economic zones as district PUDs or the BGC in Taguig as a type of district PUD, which is mostly or dominantly commercial type of PUD. So the largest type of PUD scale is what we call mini towns or planned city extensions. So these are already made up of several district PUDs, and the area is around 100 hectares already. We can consider yung mga new growth areas of our LGUs actually as PCEs. So for this large scale PUD, this is anchored by a major intermodal terminal, which should at least have around 4 modes and a regional park that will be able to service the needs of the residents of this large-scale PUD. So quickly, this slide shown on your screen summarizes the key characteristics that define and differentiate the 3 categories or scales of PUD. So you can see here that the 3 scales are differentiated by their size, their land use, zoning, dominant uses, mixed uses, the scale of the park or an open space that should be present, and the type of transport node that should be present in the different scales are also provided in the guidelines. So now we go to the principles of PUD planning and development. So we would just like to highlight these principles because these are important for us to be able to develop sustainable, equitable, resilient, and adaptable PUDs. So the first principle in PUD planning and implementation is sustainable and resilient development. So this principle advocates for a balanced approach to growth and natural resource preservation. So our sustainable development efforts should also align with environmental stewardship with a focus on resilience to climate change and natural disasters. Next, on integrated and adaptive planning, this principle underscores the importance of comprehensive and flexible planning processes that is capable of adjusting to new trends and challenges. On equity and inclusivity, we should also ensure that our new towns are accessible to all segments of society, regardless of income, age, or gender. Particularly, our PUDs must also be accessible to our vulnerable and marginalized groups of society. And lastly, we should be able to promote community engagement in the whole PUD planning process. So we should be able to engage the stakeholders in the planning process so that we will be able to harness local knowledge, consensus building, and cultivate a shared vision for the future of PUD communities. So now we go to the next section of the presentation. So now I will be sharing with you the project and site assessment criteria that is also discussed in the guide. So it is important that to highlight that the process of selecting a site for PUDs, this is a critical component of urban planning that requires a careful balance between strategic vision and detailed operations. So essentially, this approach or process is divided into two main phases or steps. First is the project or site identification, followed by the site selection. So for the project and site identification, this initial phase or first phase, the objective is to broadly identify areas with potential for development. So this is guided by the overarching strategic consideration with broader regional goals and community needs. Meanwhile, yung site selection, this follows identification of potential area and involves a more detailed technical evaluation. So for the project or site identification phase, the key considerations or criteria include the following: location, accessibility, alignment with the regional and local plans, the presence or of catalysts or triggers of development, which includes major infrastructure projects that are ongoing or in the pipeline for potential PUD areas, as well as a preliminary market analysis. So for the next phase or stage of the selection of sites, we now go into the uh, more detailed technical evaluation of the most suitable sites for development. So once we have already identified the broad area where we can identify where we can put up our PUD or new town, we will go now into more detailed site selection or evaluation. So here the focus is on technical feasibility and community impacts. So we should be able to study the following considerations. Again, more detailed studies on accessibility and connectivity, infrastructure and resource availability. We should also check, of course, now for all our planners present, land suitability, zoning, and land use, if the development is compatible with our land uses. The project should be able to also demonstrate that it has minimal environmental impact, or what are the mitigation measures that can be carried out. We can also study social cohesion and community support, market demand, and of course, legal and regulatory compliance. So this stage is actually in the project development phase already, when we are preparing na po for our feasibility studies for our new towns or PUDs. Okay, so now we go to the next part of the presentation. Sorry, that will focus on the planning and design standards in the guidelines. So in the guidelines, aside from the PUD scales that I earlier shared with you, we also have what we call different PUD typologies that is characterized according to the various modes of development or the dominant use of that PUD. So it ranges from residential to eco zones, each with its unique characteristics and requirements. So we have diverse PUD typologies, which include the following: PUD residential, PUD mixed use, industrial, ecozone, government center, um, the tourism economic zone, and PUD heritage. So we can think of these PUD typologies as the dominant use or dominant function of that PUD type. And these types of development are also governed and covered by specific policies and laws, as well as regulatory issuances of appropriate agencies. It is also crucial to underscore the importance of thoughtful planning and approaches in PUDs. So in the guidelines, we also have what we call the PUD planning approaches. So um, the guidelines suggest that in order of priority, we should develop first infill developments, followed by grayfield developments, brownfield developments, greenfield developments, and lastly, reclamation development. So this planning approach and order of priority highlights that in terms po of sustainability and environmental impacts, utilizing vacant, idle, or underused parcels of land in built-up areas, for example, infield, grayfield, or brownfield development should be prioritized first before venturing into greenfield or reclamation development. So hindi po tayo magde-develop agad greenfield areas when we have actually infill or areas that are underutilized within our built-up areas. So that is the suggestion in the or recommendation in the guidelines. So next, we now go into the land use allocation recommendations in the guidelines. But before this, we'd like to highlight the principles for sustainable neighborhood planning, which is also discussed in more detail in the guidelines. So the guidance actually adopts the UN Habitat's 5 principles for sustainable neighborhood planning to achieve effective land use. So I already discussed earlier the concept of mixed land use, and related to this, we should be also limiting single land uses in PUDs. The next principle of a sustainable neighborhood planning is on high density urban development, which is actually a response to the growing population explosion and rapid urbanization, especially in our cities. So this principle emphasizes preventing urban sprawl and fostering sustainable uh, urban extensions. High density can be defined as concentration of people and their activities. The next principle for sustainable neighborhood planning that we would like to espouse in our PUDs is also on adequate space for streets and an efficient street networks, which aims to create a comprehensive street network in high-density cities that support not only vehicular and public transport, but also enhances pedestrian and cyclist accessibility. So a walkable neighborhood is determined by the proximity to essential services and is typically within a 400 to 450 meter range. Lastly, on social mix, we would like to promote or foster social cohesion in our new towns and PUDs, whereby the different social classes or income classes in a community can interact and they have an access to diverse housing types. So based on the sustainable neighborhood principles that I uh, discussed earlier, the guidelines actually has a recommendation on the land use allocations for municipal PUDs and city PUDs or more built up or urban PUDs. So this general framework for land use allocation is also based on the typical requirements for PUDs. So the primary objective of this mix of land uses is to meet the diverse needs of the population, support economic development, protect the environment, and enhance the quality of life for all the residents. So due to the unique nature also and specialized requirements of each PUD typology, so we recognized earlier, no, the PUD typologies that I shared earlier, these have specialized requirements or unique characteristics such as economic zones, tourism zones, and heritage PUDs. Actually, definitive percentages for land uses cannot be prescribed without detailed market analysis. So the final land use allocation should also be backed by detailed market analysis and consideration of local conditions. And we'd like to highlight that each PUD project should undergo a thorough review process to tailor the land use allocations that best meet the unique needs and objectives of the developments to make it both viable and sustainable settlement. So the guidelines also reiterates several local planning standards that is pursuant to current Philippine laws, policies, and regulations in the country. So we have reiterated their local planning standards, for example, on easements and buffers, as well as lots and block sizes, building setbacks, and we also recommended in the guidelines that PUD implementers can also adopt certain international planning standards to make PUDs in the Philippines at par with sustainable international practices, for example, on road planning and design, streetscape, buildings in terms of setbacks again, and open space percentage or allocation. And lastly, in terms of design considerations, we also promote the development of active streets, sustainable building design, nature-based solutions, to conduct placemaking activities, and to integrate technologies or smart city approaches in our PUDs and new towns. So I think we're down to the last part of my presentation. So actually, a key feature of the PUD guidelines is how PUDs can be better integrated into the existing planning framework on land use plans of LGUs. So to incorporate the PUD guidelines into the CLUP 12-step process, it can be actually integrated already with our existing steps. So among the major outputs in mainstreaming PUD in the CLUP and ZO are the following. So we should be able to identify suitable sites for PUD development based on the set of criteria and data requirements. So earlier, I shared to you the project and site identification criteria. So that can also be, a result of that can be an identification of suitable sites in a city or municipality, defining the vision, goals, and major strategies on PUD, preparing a conceptual spatial plan and zoning regulations for our PUDs. This includes the formulation of land use guidelines. And we'd like to highlight also that there's a need to prepare the Comprehensive Development Master Plans or CDMPs as a requirement for your CLUP and ZO review and approval. And as a result of this integration, you should be able to identify implementation strategies for PUDs, which includes priority and catalytic or very impactful programs and projects, as well as setting up, if needed, institutional offices to fast-track PUD implementation in the LGU. So we also recognize that LGUs are in different stages of formulating or updating your CLUP. So in the guidelines, we also discussed possible scenarios for LGUs to integrate PUDs into your CLUP and ZO. So I will just be highlighting three scenarios for our webinar today. So first, if the LGU has an updated CLUP that already includes or identifies PUDs, so the next steps would involve the LGU would need to have or to develop more detailed implementation plans for the identified PUD areas, ensuring that they align with the broader goal of the CLUP. In terms of regulatory compliance, the LGU should ensure that all zoning regulations are in place to support the implementation of PUDs. Next, for LGUs with an updated CLUP but without identified PUDs, the focus of this LGU should be first to identify potential PUD areas using the project and site selection that I discussed earlier. Amending the CLUP, so if possible, to revise the CLUP to include the newly identified PUD areas and updating your zoning ordinance to incorporate regulations for these identified new PUD areas. The next LGU scenario, for those LGUs that are in the process of updating their CLUP and who have already identified PUDs, the next steps would include for you to reaffirm or revisit your PUD, your identified PUD areas, whether they still align with the current development needs and goals of the LGU, and to incorporate latest best practices in terms of sustainable urban development in your PUD land use and zoning. So the last two scenarios I think are not really applicable for our Metro Manila LGUs, but if you'd like to read more, these are available in the guidelines also. So I will just, in the interest of time, I will just focus on very specific entry points on integrating PUDs into the land use plan. So for step 3, in setting the vision on defining a clear and compelling vision to guide the future development of a city or municipality in relation to PUDs is fundamental, as it sets the overarching goals that PUDs should fulfill. So for integrating PUDs in the vision of the LGU, for those LGUs updating their CLUP and integrating their PUDs in the CLUP, you should be able to produce a refined or enhanced vision statement aligning with the city or municipality's vision that encompasses the goals of the PUD. On the other hand, for LGUs which will create their own PUD conceptual plan, the LGUs can also have another very specific vision for their identified new towns. So an example here is shown for Tacloban City's Plan City Extension Vision Statement. So actually the LGU also did a planning exercise with us, and they developed, in addition to their CLUP vision, a vision statement for their identified new growth area, identified PCE development for the Tacloban North PUD. So the next step, of course, I think this is one of the hardest steps to undertake in the CLUP formulation. In step 4, the situational analysis. So For this step, analyzing the situation is about understanding, of course, the current issues, potentials, and needs for future development of PUDs in the area. So the output of this integration process is crucial for guiding the development of PUDs to provide a more detailed understanding of the local context, identify where PUDs can be most effective also. So in you would just like to highlight, ganito po yung itsura, no? So in every PUD integration step into the CLUP, there's a detailed discussion there on the tools and methods that you need for mainstreaming, as well as the data inputs or the resources, materials that need to be prepared, and the output mainstreaming step. So for this, in step 4, in situational analysis, you should be able to identify the issues and opportunities of the PUDs in your area. Be able to develop an inventory of policies, plans, programs, projects that are related to new towns and PUDs. Conduct an institutional capacity assessment and project current and future needs for PUDs. For setting the goals and objectives, this is also important to ensure that these align with the broader goals of our community, of our city or municipality, and to ensure that it aligns also with the broader land use strategy of the LGU. So for LGUs, we should create their own PUD plan. If you can see in your screen, we actually also suggest, no, if it's possible, the LGU can create what we call some sort of a strategic framework for the PUD to guide the overall development. So this includes a vision statement, a development goals for the 5 sectors that is related to the PUD development, and also specific strategies or actions for PUD development. On step 6, establishing development thrust and spatial strategies. This is also instrumental for integrating PUDs into the CLUP. So this step is about translating the high-level vision that you had in step 3 and situational analysis into more actionable strategies and plans, which are essential for successful integration of PUDs into the larger urban framework, which is in the CLUP. So the output of this integration step is a spatial strategy map for new towns and PUDs in relation to the rest of the municipality and city, as well as its transport, open space, network, and growth areas. So what you can see here is an example of the district framework that we did for the PUD of Tacloban North. So I'm sure our LGUs are familiar also with the different development thrusts and spatial strategies. So shown on screen are the different development thrusts and spatial strategies that can be promoted as applicable into your identified PUDs. This can also serve as design references later on some of the developments of mixed-use PUDs in other countries. So again, for the thrust and spatial strategies, we can also promote or use the idea of bed sheds and neighborhood development. So in step 7, in preparing the land use plan, this now involves the translation of the development goals that we earlier discussed and the spatial strategies into a land use allocation, no, that outlines also our land use policies for the LGUs. So in this step, the land use plan should be able to highlight the preferred development approach, including the identification of growth centers, which may incorporate PUDs that adhere to new town guidelines. So the outputs of this integration step includes proposed revision in the CLUP's land use map, particularly the location and extents or boundaries of the new towns or PUD, and as well as the investment program or the major or key strategic programs and projects that will support PUD implementation in the land use plan. So as you can see here, as part of the preparation of the land use plan of the PUD in Tacloban, we also um, identify the different uses within that PUD. So we didn't stop at delineating the boundaries and extents, but we actually tried to also identify the land uses that is within the PUD. So down to the next few steps. So for drafting the zoning ordinance, this is part, of course, of translating the CLUP into more actionable and enforceable regulations. So zoning district regulations for PUDs will include specific guidelines on the use, density, and design of PUDs, ensuring that they adhere to our national laws and standards and maybe adopt some of the international um, planning design standards in the area. So these zoning provisions can also specify planning techniques and designs for PUDs, including exceptions and mitigating measures to ensure that PUDs serve their intended purpose. On zoning administration, setting up the framework for how PUDs will be administered and enforced within the framework of the zoning ordinance, which include perhaps identifying the office or body which will have enforcement powers, can also be specified at this stage. Next, on the conduct of public hearings, we would just like to highlight that the public discussion of the CLUP and zoning ordinance should also include the proposals or more detailed proposals of identified PUD developments in the LGU. Lastly, the next few steps on step 10, review, adopting, and approving the CLUP or ZO. We just like to highlight that based on also on the existing CLUP guidelines for LGUs with identified PUD areas and projects, one of the requirements we'd like to reiterate is actually the development of the CDMP, a Comprehensive Development Master Plan, to facilitate the conduct and review and approval of the CLUP and zoning ordinances. So as discussed in the guidelines, this CDMP shall consist of two documents. First, the preliminary conceptual master plan and the final master plan. So this CDMP shall be prepared by the PUD project proponent. So for the preliminary conceptual master plan, for the LGUs which will are still updating their CLUP, this preliminary conceptual master plan will form part already of your submission of your final draft of your CLUP and ZO to your sanggunian and to the appropriate land use committee, whether the PLUC, RLUC, or DSUD for review and approval. So magpre-prepare na po kayo nitong preliminary CDMP when you submit your CLUP and ZO. For those who are still updating, kung magsasabit na po kayo sa inyong PLUC, RLUC, or DSUD, whatever the case may be. And then upon approval of the CLUP and ZO, the project proponent shall develop what we call the final master plan for all the identified PUDs in consultation, of course, with relevant stakeholders. The final master plan shall be developed based on the phasing strategy. So kung ano po yung mauuna dun sa preliminary master plan. And this will be the basis for your LCs, development permits of projects situated within the PUD areas. So considering that the complexity and scale of PUD projects, so meron din tayong mga malalaking PUD projects and we recognize this. The guidelines on PUD provides the list of documentary requirements necessary for the review and approval of these CDMPs, and also the different components or elements of the CDMPs, depending on the scale of the PUD, is also specified in the guidelines. Lastly, on step 11, so ayun, kung nagawa na natin yung CLUP and ZO with your very detailed PUD plans, the next step of course is to implement the CLUP with your PUD, more PUD detailed plans. So this include developing of course yung mga master plans natin for PUDs, financing for the projects in the PUD area. So this includes including the PUD projects in your LDIP, AIP, and perhaps venturing into PPPs and other modes of sourcing investments from government. Preparing, of course, the needed feasibility studies for project implementation, procurement, as well as perhaps creating, if needed, or kung sa tingin nyo po kailangan, maybe a PUD committee or TWG at the local level to fast-track PUD implementation. So, yun lang po for integrating the PUD steps into the CLUP. So, in closing, I know na medyo madami yung mga requirements, no, because of these new guidelines, but we would just like to share na in 2024 po, last year, the DSUD, through our Environmental Land Use and Urban Planning Bureau, as well as our selected regional offices, we actually prepared PCE Plan City Extension plans for 3 selected LGUs, Zamboanga, Tacloban, and Butuan City. So these are the more detailed conceptual and implementation plans for identified PCEs in the 3 LGUs. So we conducted planning exercises with these 3 LGUs. The learnings from those planning exercises serve as valuable inputs in crafting the new guidelines on PUDs and new towns that hopefully will make it relevant to the actual needs and capacities on the ground of our LGU. So doable naman po siya, no? And I hope our more advanced cities, HUCs, especially in Metro Manila, can be the one to promote the use of the application of the PUD guidelines as you update your or formulate your CLUP and ZO. So with the support of our regional offices, so here we have our NCR office, our department can provide more focused technical assistance on PUD integration into the CLUP and zoning ordinance following yung mga principles of sustainable and resilient development, integrated planning, and community engagement in the entire planning process. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share the new guidelines of DSUD on new towns and PUD. And for more information, you may download a copy of the full guidelines in our website. So maraming salamat po.
Now we move on to our Q&A, our open forum. So the first question, what is the DHSUD's plan for several PUDs ongoing for several areas in the Philippines which were started before the guideline was released? Is there an effort to reassess their developments? May I please invite Ma'am Theresa to answer this question?
Good morning. Good morning once again, Claude, and to the participants. So for these
Okay, I think you're
questions,
still on mute.
is my audio clear already?
Okay, now it's clear, ma'am.
Okay, so for this question, actually the guidelines applies for new PUD developments. So PUD developments that are newly identified in the CLUP and zoning ordinances of LGU. So perhaps for these PUDs which are already ongoing or have already been established in the guidelines, we actually have a section there on monitoring and evaluation. So there are several indicators which touch on different categories such as sustainability, inclusivity, the principles that I mentioned earlier. So there are indicators there for assessing PUD developments, whether they promote the principles, the PUD planning principles. And of course, we know that the monitoring and evaluation should be serve as an input for future enhancements in existing PUD developments. But right now, technically, the guidelines of this would applies to the PUDs identified, new PUDs identified in the CLUPs and ZOs of our LG. Our LGUs and PUD proponents can, of course, use an evaluation criteria in the guidelines to assess the effectivity of their ongoing and established PUDs. Thank you.
Okay,